Today, we are privileged to have Norm Miller with us, a seasoned law enforcement veteran. He's at the forefront of analyzing how gangs use social media and music, such as drill rap, to propagate their culture, recruit members, and even challenge authorities.
The internet has had a profound effect on this, and the fact that now you can recruit anywhere in the world. As they said that thing, sticks and stones, words never hurt you. Well, if I'm using my words to incite someone to do harm, to me, that's problematic. When you look at law enforcement as a whole, we don't have people that want to do that career anymore. So given the fact that we have people who are going into law enforcement who probably shouldn't be in law enforcement, and given the fact we have this militant attitude sometimes where it's anti-law enforcement, it's going to be a clash.
Welcome to Well Informed, where we unpack the complexities of keeping our community safe and delve into modern challenges at the intersection of law enforcement and social media. Today, we are privileged to have Norm Miller with us, a seasoned law enforcement veteran with 3 decades of experience and a wealth of knowledge in criminal justice, homeland security, and intelligence analysis. Norm has dedicated much of his career to fighting gang violence and understanding the nuances of its evolution, especially in the digital age. He's at the forefront of analyzing how gangs use social media and music, such as drill rap, to propagate their culture, recruit members, and even challenge authorities. His insights shed light on the critical aspect of modern gang dynamics that affect not just law enforcement, but really society at large. So let's dive deep into these issues and explore the challenges of gang culture through the lens of an expert who has been on the front lines of this battle for over 3 decades. Norm, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here.
I'm not even sure who that guy you just talked about is.
It's always weird having your bio right in front of you.
Yeah.
Again, doing public speaking for your job, for my job, it's just always strange. It's like, I did that?
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah. So, hey, welcome to the show, man. It's just really exciting to have you here.
Thank you.
And we've been having a couple conversations beforehand as well about some of these aspects. But, we mentioned, again, spanning almost 30 years in law enforcement. So I think just to give the folks at home, a little insight into who you are you able to kind of talk about, with that career spanning that long in law enforcement, can you share with us what initially drew you to specifically, of course, the gang side, and what's kept you motivated in this extremely challenging field?
Well, I started out as a deputy sheriff in Pinellas County, Florida, which is the Clearwater area, and worked, obvious patrol places and some pretty specialized units. And then I went to SRO because I was coaching football. It was a natural fit. And I stumbled across the Latin Kings. And, I had no idea what a Latin King was. I just knew that there was a gang, and I had heard about gangs, but, gangs were up north. They weren't in, Florida, not in Clearwater, Florida, for that matter. At that time, I was in Seminole, Florida, where my school was. And culturally, not a place that you would normally have a Hispanic-based gang. So given that, I had to really speed up my learning curve in that. And, there was no internet, then. I mean, so it meant calling guys and, cold calling guys up north in Chicago and New York and trying to find out who they were, and then, seeing who they were and then talking to them and looking at the graffiti they were doing, and just kind of led me down that path. And I got an opportunity to come to the state attorney's office as an investigator under Bernie McCabe, and now I work for Bruce Bartlett, who's the state attorney. And when I came over, I made a deal that, hey, I still want to work gangs. And they have allowed me to continue in that process, and I've been doing it ever since. And what keeps me here is that it's such a unique and diverse, area. It never ceases to amaze me. There's always some new dynamic, and, whether it be, now the addition of technology and social media, but, the things that these guys do sometimes is astounding. And you see what tips off a whole list of homicides can be the minorest thing, or a major thing. So, when I teach, I always tell things, small things mean big things. So, it's attention to detail. So I've always kind of liked those kind of things, and it intrigued me. So it's kept me employed and entertained, for this long. And It does wear on you. I mean, I can't say that I'm not ready to move on to the next chapter of my life, but I'm still having fun. I think my biggest joy now is teaching and getting that next generation prepared and getting them to think outside the box and look at the perspectives that they're coming from and understand that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It really seems like to span that long and be that involved, there needs to be a natural curiosity. And I think that is something that's really important because that helps the investigation and that helps the teaching side of things too. Because to your point, looking things from that outside the box perspective is something really important. Because just before we started recording, you had mentioned, as the criminal, what's your one, motive is, outfoxing the police basically. So having to be that one step ahead and getting into it, you mentioned that, learning about the Latin Kings or just some of those little elements of just little pieces here and there, right? We don't have gangs here. This isn't our problem. And sometimes, in British Columbia and Canada, where we are, even in Canada, that seems to be one of the aspects that we're trying to really shift that narrative of saying we don't have gang problems here. Well, there's a lot of science that actually do show, we are dealing with a lot of gang issues happening. And, so you mentioned kind of the Latin Kings, and just for folks who maybe had no idea, who are completely outside of this world, what are the Latin Kings? And if you have any kind of history about that, just to share.
Well, they were primarily a Hispanic group that started in the Chicago area. They have their roots from Puerto Rico, from some of the prison gangs, and it just kind of started as a Hispanic brotherhood, and it kind of morphed into a criminal enterprise, as sometimes these things do. And they've been very organized, criminal enterprise, and been responsible for some, violent times throughout the nation. They're prevalent, but they're not as prevalent or as violent. I mean, I almost say they're kind of like organized crime because they try to keep that stuff down. But it happens. I mean, unfortunately, when you're in that world, violence is a subset or a product, if you will, of the business. So, it becomes in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting to get the insight to these things because, a couple of years ago, myself and one of our colleagues, Jesse, we went down to your conference in Florida, your gang conference. And, I'm certified in gangs, level 1. So I got the history, I got the understanding, and it's just such a wealth of information to be able to share. And, why we talk about these things is just being able to see the evolution of where they were to where we are now. And that was one of the things you had mentioned earlier, talking about kind of the evolution and seeing those gang dynamic strategies evolve. So specifically when we come to the advent of internet and social media, in your kind of tenure, where have you really seen the prowess of some of these gang members evolve, and where have you seen kind of the increases in how things like recruitment strategies are being utilized, and where do you see that in the social media side?
Well, I mean, crack cocaine had the first huge influence because of the money, but the internet has had a profound effect on this, and the fact that now you can recruit anywhere in the world, and you can collaborate and negotiate, and you can sell, and you can buy, and you can trade, and you can interact with anyone. So when you have those factors in place, it makes it more complex, and you have a sophistication that comes along with it. Even as simple as some of these groups are, there is a sophistication because of the added internet process, and guys being able to go on TikTok and sell drugs, or internet on Instagram and and whatnot. I mean, you think about it. You look at in the 70s when we look at when our Bloods and Crips were starting to grow, and our Bloods and Crips are on the West Coast were starting to grow. They didn't talk to one another that much. I mean, there were some similarities that happened because of human growth, but they weren't talking to one another. There might be a cousin over there because you couldn't call long distance. It was expensive, so there wasn't that collaboration. I mean, there was to some degree, but it was minimal. Now it's insane.
Yeah.
With the flick of a wrist and a finger, you can contact anyone in the world. And, there's so many encrypted, apps that you can use and communicate with. And it's, it has changed the way criminals do business without a doubt.
Yeah. And, that's a really good point to bring up, the different ways that they're communicating and like the encrypted apps. So, specifically on those, and are you able to elaborate a little bit more on what are some of the challenges today that law enforcement face now with investigating these types of criminal activity?
Well, first and foremost, the biggest problem is knowing. There is just so much of it. As an agency, you can only commit so many resources to it. So a lot of times it's dumb luck. We find out about it. But I mean, the thing is that they're using these, end-to-end encryption, that has, CIA type encryption that you're never going to break that. And again, given the fact too that some of these companies are not law enforcement friendly. So, given that aspect of it and the encryption aspect of it, it makes it difficult sometimes, and, sometimes it's just having dumb luck where you actually trip upon, finding out about something, or someone tips you off, or you get a CI that, feeds you information. But it's getting harder and harder to detect simply because it is easier to be undetected.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And CI, for those unaware, being criminal informant. With the communication aspect, we have seen a lot now gangs and criminal organizations not being charged with the specific actions, but under RICO. So RICO charges being laid against these individuals. Does that have anything to do with the communication and what's being said there?
I mean, it has to some degree, but mostly it's the associations that is where you make the RICO cases. And you can show the associations through telephonic or social media, but most of the time it's going to be the criminal interactions that they're using the criminal enterprise to fulfill or further their entity, whether it be drugs or human trafficking or car parts, whatever that thing is. But it's that showing that association. That's where the RICO comes in. Is it an added tool? Sure, but it's not going to be the only thing you make. You can't just make. There has to be predicate acts, and those predicate acts are crimes. So just being on the phone is not a crime.
Right.
Just being on a encrypted app is not a crime. Discussing criminality can add to that, but you have to have actual crimes being committed to have the RICO Act to be able to put it in effect.
I see. So it's just kind of one of those added layers, an additional tool that is available, to make some of those.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's good. And, speaking of going back to some of the, challenges being those encrypted chat apps, there seems to be a lot of, like we were talking about, knowing, right? And this is what, what our company tries to do. And as a teacher, right, you try to get people involved and informed about what are these encrypted chat apps, and, especially with how they work with law enforcement and how they sometimes don't work with law enforcement. That encrypted version of communication has become so well sought out in the internet in general, but there are some flip sides of what that means and what can or can't be accessed through that. So obviously encrypted means it's encrypted, right? So how often are some of these cases where you're like, hey, I know they're on Signal or Telegram. Is any able to give any sort of insight into what particular conversations might be happening back and forth?
No, I mean, it's encrypted. That's what it means. And most often than not, these are not going to be compliant with subpoenas or search warrants. And the other factor is, they're using unique forms of encryption. They're using like gambling sites, like poker, gaming sites, to talk to one another. They're getting that because, like, for example, like on Xbox, you can set up your own channel.
Yep.
And, you can have your guys talk to one another. Well, it's just like 5 guys in 5 different cities who go on Xbox and can discuss business freely. And it's, a channel only they're on.
Yeah. So, while they're playing a game of Call of Duty.
Right. And they don't necessarily have to be playing Call of Duty. But, they're using those tools to communicate. So there are layers to what we're finding out, and it is getting harder and harder to find out.
And I think even on the public front too, one of the things that we're seeing is the usage of language and emojis as well. That specific language that's even made publicly available. Some folks might just scroll past and not think anything of. But one of the things we're also seeing as well is communication happening not through direct messages, but it's actually like Instagram handles are being made. Like usernames are some form of communication. They'll leave just a blank comment or they'll follow an account with a specific word or phrase as that username.
Yeah, I mean, you see the hashtags, hashtag, what up, or whatever, it is, but using hashtags, using emojis, using phrases. I mean, that's their encrypted language. I mean, you look at, the FBI has a whole unit that does nothing but, a kite is a form of communication that prisoners use in prison where they will write out something in code and it has to be deciphered. So you got code breakers that, like World War II, German Nazis were using that these guys are using. So, you have that type of thing that's now gone digital where, they're writing something and you look at it and it doesn't make sense, but if you take every third word, it makes something, and I'm just using that as an example.
Yeah,
but,
of course.
Whatever their decipher is, and the decipher is the tool that helps solve the puzzle. They're only limited to their own creativity. So, we have some that are very sophisticated. We have some that are very, very simple. And it's like before we had the internet, the one thing that some of our gangs used was Pig Latin. And because obviously, the average person is not going to know, Pig Latin. So, I mean, it just depends. And, you have native individuals like Haitians that use Creole and, guys from Montreal who use French. I mean, there's always a way that you're going to have some secret. Back in the day, Latin kings, for example, were very notorious for body signals. They would cross their chests or pull up on their shoulders, or wrap, to communicate non-verbally to their other, guys if they were going to rip somebody off or they're going to, do something. So, I mean, it's been a part of our society for a long, long time,
And that communication, kind of evolving into where we see now into the music side of things. This is really where, your presentation is going to be about tomorrow for the conference. But, talking about specifically how music and, of course, rap and drill rap music, how it's being utilized to recruit, how it's being utilized to brag almost about past criminal activities. This form of hip hop, drill rap, specifically what we're talking about. For those who have who've heard of hip hop or listen to hip hop themselves, can you talk a little bit about what drill rap is specifically, kind of how it started and to where we are seeing it today?
Yeah, well, historically, music has been the soundtrack of our lives. There isn't, I don't think I can think of a pivotal point where there wasn't some song of emphasis that was used as a rallying cry. So in the hood, so to speak, or the black community, there were, songwriters or song storytellers who talked about the plights of what was going on in the community. Crack cocaine hit. That was devastating on the community. So they talked about that devil and then they talked about, police brutality. And then there was the, activist part of you. You had NWA come out and, I can't think of the names right now. I've gone blank. But these groups were, historically telling the tale of what's going on day to day. And then as we delved into, more crack and started to come into meth and, it was easy to make, we started to have trap music that kind of talked about, making their, drugs and the money they were making because money started to really, escalate. And then we get into the era where we get the gangster rap, and gangster rap was more of the hardcore, serious version of talking about life in the ghetto. And then we boil down to where we are today with drill rap. And drill rap is, to me, there are those who say there's entertainment value, but the main purpose of it is to send a message. It was a messaging vehicle for one group to let another group or individuals know what their intentions were or what they had done. So it almost took over the graffiti wall, so to speak, and became the verbal graffiti wall. And unfortunately, the things they talked about led to people dying. And I think this is the first time in our lifetime that we've ever seen music that actually is the result of people dying. People died because of gangster rap, but it wasn't the music that they died because of.
Of course.
They died because of the conflict between, the two rival groups. Now it's the music itself that's driving the death. And that's a dangerous thing to have. And it has changed the way people react, and the violence has escalated because of it, I think.
Yeah, because usually we see sometimes, well, on some media channels where the rap in general gets all under this umbrella of it's causing this, it's causing that. Now, there is, to your point, one small kind of tendril of that is absolutely something to take a look at, and that is kind of that drill rap scene. Just before we were talking about how things like music lyrics can actually lead to charges. And there's one particular case in Canada that's being looked at. But we also look in other parts of the states, like California specifically, where lyrics themselves cannot be used as evidence against the person who's being charged as additional evidence because of things that we talked about earlier, like freedom of speech and what that means. So can you talk about some of those kind of differences where the lyrics themselves, what they're calling for, what they're inciting, or how that works in the kind of the criminal charge world?
Well, the point of contention is what's First Amendment? What's freedom of speech? I would argue that if you're going to lay claim of killing someone or ordering someone's death, that's not freedom of speech. You have the right to say a lot of things, but when it results in violence being invoked on someone because of the words you say, as they said that things, sticks and stones, words never hurt you. Well, if I'm using my words to incite someone to do harm, to me, that's problematic. And I think, that's what we're looking at. Now, California has said you can't. New York has said you can. Atlanta is using it, and there's cases that are on the horizon that they're going to go forward with. We have a case in Miami right now that's we're looking at closely to see what happens. But as law enforcement's perspective, our thing is that this is problematic for the community, and it's not First Amendment rights. I'll let you sing about anything, but if you're going to talk about killing somebody or take ownership for killing someone, and we can prove that, then we should be able to use those lyrics. There's to say it's theater of the mind, or it's fake. There are some degree to that, but if I can take that song and you closely know the results of what happened, to me, that's almost like a confession.
Yeah.
Because what would be the difference if you take the music away and someone's sitting in an interrogation room and they'd say the same thing? What's the difference?
Yeah.
So, I would argue that freedom of speech has its limits, and that's where we are. That's going to determine if that's true or not.
And, we see a lot of that as well, actually, here in our home in British Columbia. Specifically, there's one case that comes to mind where there was a specific drill rap song that was released, talking about using coded language to insinuate that somebody had got shot at a traffic stop, basically. And what we see a few weeks later is a couple of youth hiding their faces, posing with an enormous amount of cash that you typically wouldn't see from a typical kind of dial-a-dope operation, somebody who's just kind of slinging drugs. It was a lot of cash. And the caption on that post was very similar to the lyrics of the song. And we saw other individuals involved in that kind of negative peer group, that gang, leaving comments, all very similar to those lyrics. And part of the lyrics of that particular song was, something about my youth on the go. I got my youth on the go. Right? And those youth, again, posing with that, where we see that kind of relationship being potentially hypothesis. Hey, what did those two kids potentially have to do with that particular act of violence that was being bragged about? So we see a lot of that connection with the music and the social media piece as well.
Yeah, I mean that's no doubt, and that's the problem, is that when you have this, I mean, this new generation is very forthright on sharing everything about their lives. So that's where I draw the line in the sand, where I say if an individual lays claim to a murder, and we can prove that, why do we dispute that? Because it convicts them. Well, don't sing about it. That's the simple. But the thing is, if you want to sing about it and tell about it and give all the details about it and take credit for it, then who am I not to arrest you for it? If I have the evidence that supports the crime.
Yeah.
I'm not saying guys should be going out and just arresting willy-nilly based on lyrics alone, but in the totality of it, in the course of my investigation, I have music that supports what happened. Yeah, it is going to be a driving force, especially when we get the retaliation because of that music.
Right.
And that leads to other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it's a good point, because it's, even if, let's say, somebody is calling out somebody or saying that they're going to do something in that song, that invokes this sort of response that needs to happen. Because, again, one of the conversations we were having earlier was this idea about respect and what that means. So do you want to kind of elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, I mean, this whole world now has a misguided definition of what respect means. As I was growing up, I hate to be that old guy that says, back in my day, but it's true. You have to earn respect to get respect, and you have to give respect. Whereas, their definition of respect is totally different than what reality is. And a lot of times we have people who, for lack of better terms, get their feelings hurt. And that escalates to shootings.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, people die because of those, minor words. We can say sticks and stones again. People are dying because of what someone says or didn't say or said about someone or alleged. So it's a difficult line, a tightrope we walk, but I think society has to rise up and say, we're not going to tolerate this, and put a stop to it.
Yeah.
England's kind of been on the forefront where they've outlawed it. And I don't know necessarily it has to go outlaw, but I think it starts at home, for one, and two, there has to be a pushback from the community that says we're not going to allow this, and you'll see it change.
Yeah.
But until then, it's not.
Yeah. And just so in terms of outlawing, we were saying earlier that the UK specifically has actually outlawed or banned drill rap from that. And, looking at our work in the social media analysis aspect of that, we were doing some work in the UK as well. And, I kind of got introduced to drill rap in 2018, when that's where I saw it really happening, was in the UK. And just we were seeing that influence start to make its way here in Canada. But we had known drill rap had been around for some time. I saw it specifically first in the UK in 2018. When were you introduced to this aspect, or when did you start to discover what this drill rap scene was and where it started?
Well, it was a cause and effect. I started to see guys getting shot, and then you go back. I always monitored social media anyways, and YouTube specifically. When you have a major incident, I would call them the videographers. And if you go to any neighborhood, there's always a couple of guys that have an account, and they're kind of the hood reporters. And they'll collect footage, or they'll do their own footage, and they're kind of like the Walter Cronkite of the hood, and they'll be out there, for you old young people, Walter Cronkite was a news guy historically, but they would go out and, they would report on what's going on. And a lot of times they gave a lot of clues to who did it. They would, you would hear this guy, I can't believe Popo shot him like that. I can't believe little JoJo shot him. So that, as a law enforcement officer, I got to find out who little JoJo is, and that gives me a lead Now I still have to do my job, but that helps me to kind of follow the trail to what happened or what was the reasoning behind it, because a lot of times you'll have a shooting and you have no idea what happened. So it kind of started from there. And then I saw, like I said, the cause and effect where I would see the music and then I would see the result of someone getting shot behind the music. And then I started to look at, Chicago drill rap scene and, reading about it. And I already knew about, because we have a huge influence in Florida of Chicago. So I already knew that there was, what drill rap was. So now I'm starting to see, Florida drill rap, and we're starting to see how it's, playing out. And then you see the other things in the news, and you'll go to law enforcement conferences and intelligence briefings, and you hear about the things that are happening up there. And now you start to see it in your own neighborhoods.
Right.
So you start to look at it and go, there's something to this,
Right.
And I admit when I first started this, journey, it was like Chicken Little, the sky's falling. They were like, yeah, Norm, whatever. And it wasn't like I was the only one. There were, a lot of guys doing that. But I think the overall consensus was it wasn't as a profound effect as we thought until we found otherwise.
Yeah, of course. You have to wait until something happens before
the
response.
We started having some big incidents, and then people started realizing, hey, maybe there is something to this, and maybe the music does have, some effect on this,
And one of the things you talked about earlier was the idea of, hey, we need to, stand up and speak out and say, hey, this is what this is causing. But one of the things that I find and through, our own experience in our own work is that there's been a huge glorification of gang culture lately. And especially, again, in music and media and young people. And, what impact have you seen from that with how they're utilizing the music specifically in the lyrics, and how is that, have you seen that in your day-to-day?
Well, I like to look at it, I call it the gangster mindset. Mm-hmm. And the gangster mindset has nothing to do with gangs.
Right.
It has to do with the pushback of oppression that has occurred in the inner city, black, white, Hispanic, whatever. We have oftentimes over-policed in those areas. Mm-hmm. As a result, what we have had is people pushing back against authority. And given the fact that we've started to see this whole, I guess you call it, I wouldn't call it, I guess it is militant. You can't tell me what to do. I'm not going to listen to you. Then you have a bit of sovereign citizen ideology coming in there where, that's kind of been brought in by some of the various groups. And so when you couple that with gang, mentality, it becomes a dangerous thread. There are individuals who are just militant because, they've had a perceived oppression from their parents. They're not oppressed,
right?
But their parents raised their children that way, and you find that sometimes people react. Now, sometimes it's warranted. There are some guys that over-police. There are some agencies that over-police. But then you have others that, that just do their job. And the problem is that we have, and this goes to the whole process is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
When you look at law enforcement as a whole, we don't have people that want to do that career anymore. Mm-hmm. So given the fact that we have people who are going into law enforcement who probably shouldn't be in law enforcement, and given the fact we have this militant attitude sometimes where it's anti-law enforcement, it's going to be a clash.
Yes. Yeah, it's bound to happen. So this wouldn't be a well-informed podcast without talking about some of the strategies for early identification and intervention. So I wanted to ask about some of the aspects, or what have you found, or strategies have you found effective in engaging with communities, specifically youth, to counteract the kind of that allure of gang cultures presented through music and social media?
Well, first of all, it starts at home, man. You got to be a nosy parent. As parents need to get in their kids' lives. I mean, we've allowed TV, social media, video games to raise our children, and you've got to get involved. I mean, I can't say it any other plainer than that. Well-informed parents and involved parents are going to help children be less prone to that lifestyle. And the other thing is too, we've got to give them something. I'm not sure about what's going on up here, but in the States, everything they want to do is college prep.
Right.
Push kids toward college. Everybody's not going to college.
Yeah.
They've taken away. Now they're starting to come back, but programs like auto repair, welding, plumbing. These tech schools that were within the schools to help people prepare for a career.
Yeah.
So they can earn a living. Everybody can't work at McDonald's, and then you see when you go to McDonald's, there's not kids there anymore. It's middle-aged people,
Right.
because we've allowed people to be undereducated, I think, and not. They have this dream of things that can be made, or they're going to be a millionaire or whatever. This lofty dream, and they're not willing to work hard.
Right.
That work ethic. As a whole, we've lost, and as a country, we got to get back to, making our kids understand that if it's not worth working for, it's not worth having. And I don't think that mentality is there anymore.
Yeah.
You see, and that's partly our fault as a society, because what's everything? Instant gratification. We have drive-throughs.
We got likes and comments and
when's the last time you actually, if you're going to go to McDonald's, when's the last time you actually got out of the car and walked into McDonald's?
right. Or the mobile app.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Convenience. We've made ourselves so lazy that we're getting outpaced by some of these other countries, and we're in trouble.
Yeah.
We're in serious trouble, because when you look at, I heard a statistic the other day. World War II, there was like 11% of Americans that were in the military. Present day, it's like less than 1%.
Wow.
Or something to that degree, and that just tells you, the service that we have in the military. Now, I'm not saying we need to, have that, but it's this thing that people aren't willing to sacrifice for their country. Everybody wants to have a handout, or be given something, or get something for nothing. That.
Right.
And we have nothing to look at, but look at our blue collar world. It's shrinking.
Yeah.
Farmers can't make a living. It used to be, if you're a farmer, you could make a living. Now it's getting harder and harder. It's being subsidized because, genetic foods and genetic meats, and it's I'm on my soapbox, but the thing is that these are all things that are contributing to the decline. And here's the thing: we've sold our children a bad bill of sale, because they think that by being a drug dealer or a rapper, they're going to drive in, Bugattis and live in houses, and most of that stuff is rented.
Yeah.
So these guys
Right.
you think that are, balling, are really, they're barely living paycheck to paycheck.
And that's exactly what we see here. We see the promise of the girls, the drugs, the money, the limousines, the parties, and that is specifically what is used to lure, to say, hey, this could be your lifestyle. You could do all the same things I'm doing. You just got to go do this. You just got to go do that.
And there are those that do that. Don't get me wrong. There are guys that make a lot of money, legitimately.
Right.
And illegitimately. But those are far and few between. There's only so many Jeff Bezos, and there are only so many, guys who are billionaires.
Yeah.
The rest of us, schmucks are out here just, working, 9-to-5ers. And here's the thing. If you hear about the kids today, they make fun of 9-to-5ers.
There's this hustle culture going on.
Yeah, there was a whole TikTok I saw. Yes, I fell down that wall.
Yeah.
And where they're talking about, they're making fun of 9-to-5ers. I don't want to be a 9-to-5er.
Yeah.
When did that get belittled?
Yeah.
These were kids in high school talking about, I don't want to be a 9-to-5er. And they're downgrading that. That's the basis of our life.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely. Well, this has been a really insightful podcast and a conversation. And I hope those who are watching and listening get some good insight into what were some of those aspects of drill rap and social media and where that comes from. So any kind of closing thoughts before we wrap up here, Norm?
I would tell parents to get involved in their children's lives. get to know their friends, get to know their social media. I mean, that's important because if not, they're going to be vulnerable. We sometimes get lazy as parents, and I'm guilty as such, but we need to be nosy. My mother, I mean, I was raised this way, and I know a lot of my friends were raised this way. My mother had to know all my friends,
Right.
And I know time and time again where we'll have a missing child, and they'll ask the parent, well, who are some of his friends? And they don't know.
Yeah.
That's a sad state of
Yeah.
affair. So, parents, you have to get involved. I mean, it starts at home.
Yep.
I mean, I can't emphasize that greater than this. The problems we're having can be changed if we change the behaviors at home.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much, Norm. It's been an absolute pleasure. And we'll see you in a couple hours for the rest of the conference going on.
Thank you.
Awesome.